Well, thank you for joining me for this conversation. Again, we just wanted to chat with you more about the Association of Preserve Cape Cod, as well as talk more about the cyanobacteria monitoring program that just concluded recently. It was a long summer. We saw a lot of bloom warnings from you guys. If those for those of you who were signed up with your email warnings, it seemed like there's two every week, sometimes three. It's unfortunate to see. Do you mind just giving us a bit of a review of how that season went?
Sure. So thanks for asking us to talk about this. We find that a lot of public interest in the cyanobacteria program. People are accustomed, really interested in being able to, utilize fresh waters, and we run our program so that we can provide people with, up-to-date information on how how clear and how healthful the water quality is in a particular pond. So we looked at 130 lakes and ponds on a regular basis over the course of the summer season. And from those 130, we had 24 of them that had cyano blooms that were sufficiently troublesome to warrant a health advisory at least once by the municipal health agent in those towns where they occurred. Some of our ponds went in and out of bloom, and so there were multiple postings over the course of the summer. Others were kind of one and done. And, the overall number and percentage, not radically different than what we've seen in the last couple of years. The difference this summer was that the blooms seem to have been more severe, with higher levels of cyanobacteria, sometimes for longer periods of time than we had seen in prior summers. Obviously, one tends to look at some of the high heat, low precipitation characteristics of the summer as perhaps a contributing factor to that, but in reality, we're not 100% certain.
Were there any particular problem locations when it came to ponds that were just routinely seeing blooms, or any areas that had some significant sample sizes when it came to cyanobacteria?
Yeah, we have a couple of frequent flyers. In particular, Santuit Pond in Mashpee has been historically, last several years, our most persistent problem pond, both in terms of high numbers and long duration. We've had one pond in Falmouth that had really high numbers. This year, we were able to add toxicity testing to our repertoire, working in partnership with Barnstable County Health and Environment Department. So we were able to do some measurements of actual microcystin toxin levels in some of these ponds. And we had a Falmouth pond that was in the thousands, when the health standard is 8. And curiously, or maybe not so much, we've had a very busy end of season with 6 or 7 or 8 ponds showing up as being of concern throughout the course of the last 6 to 8 weeks. We sample fewer ponds in this fall than we do during the peak of the summer recreational season. So the fact that we're seeing, the numbers we're seeing over the course of October and November, would lead one to think that, it's been a persistent problem this year.
Yeah, as you've already mentioned, that we were seeing some of these warnings all like within weeks of the close of the monitoring. It didn't really abate just with the end of the summer. So, can you maybe give a few a few theories as to what that may have been caused by? Is it the heat? Is it just an uptick in fertilizer use?
Well,
What's
so,
going on?
so you got a couple of different things going on during the course of the summer season. It's our working premise that heavy precipitation events. And obviously, it was a dry summer, so we didn't get so many of those. But where they happen, they tend to happen, high volume. One of the real time implications of climate change is that we're getting more significant and prolonged drought periods broken up by higher volume rainstorms. And those high volume rainstorms, have a tendency to wash fertilizers and nutrient loads off the watershed, off the roadways, into stormwater conveyances, into these ponds, and they can provide a burst of food that can cause some of these ponds that are in marginal condition to experience blooms. Certainly, the heat of the summer doesn't help. Cyanobacteria are uniquely acclimated to warmer environments, so they like it when we turn up the heat as we have. But then in the fall, I think what we might be seeing is, these ponds do what's known as turnover in the fall. So you get the warm waters up on top. They have tended to create a temperature of thermocline, which is if you've ever jumped into a pond on a hot summer day, you find that the top layers are warm and you get down to the colder layers. Those thermoclines separate those lower levels of the water body from the upper reaches, which tend to be more oxygenated. And so those lower levels become oxygen starved and anoxic. And that can create a chemical reaction that releases phosphorus from the sediments. And when those thermoclines break down in the fall as the top layers cool, you can have a mixing of the ponds, and that brings all that phosphorus from the deep layers up into the surface layers, makes that phosphorus bioavailable, feeds cyanobacteria. So, one of the, clear potential problems that we're having is that the extended and more durable thermoclines that are forming because of climate change and other water quality changes are creating the conditions that allow during the fall those bottom nutrients to become available and are feeding some of these late season cyanoblooms that we're seeing right now.
Kind of taking a step back and just looking at the program in general, would you say it's been a success? Would you have any challenges to overcome still in terms of either getting citizens involved, more staffing? I think you had mentioned as well there's some plans for the future of this program that are going to be a bit different for next year.
Yeah, so we're quite proud of our cyanobacteria program. It's grown from a handful of ponds 5 years ago to the 130 or so that we're able to do. So we're able to provide a much broader coverage to the program and therefore enhance people's knowledge of what conditions are. And by doing so, giving them the information they need to make public health decisions that are in their own and their pets' own best interests. So that's been great. It's a big program to run. It's complex from a logistics point of view. And as much as we'd like to, the prospect of expanding the program to cover more of the almost 900 ponds that we have on Cape Cod is a daunting challenge, both from a financing and a staffing point of view. So one of the things that we're looking to transition the program to over time is through a partnership we have with the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. We've been trying to match up our ground sampling results with their remote satellite sensing. So trying to learn how ponds that are experiencing cyanobacteria blooms or have the conditions that would lend themselves to cyanobacteria bloom, how those appear from space so that we can transition to a program that's reliant more heavily on remote sensing so that when we see ponds that are potentially concerning, we have the ability to go out and ground truth that through sampling. So that's one of the ways that we're looking to expand the program's reach while not necessarily getting into more routine sampling, is using our resources where it would be necessary and most helpful. So that's where we're headed. We're not there yet. We'll be doing another expansion of that pilot program with NOAA in the summer of 23 to hopefully learn more so that we can develop those relationships and then have a more robust program that's based more on remote sensing than actual physical sampling for the summer of 24, sometime beyond. Beyond that, we're working with the Cape Cod Commission on something known as the Freshwater Initiative, which was recently funded by the county commissioners to try and get a handle on standard non-cyano parameters of water quality in more ponds, so we can understand where water quality is going Cape-wide on ponds, what's driving those changes in water quality, and then most importantly, what we can do about it. So we'll be launching a new program in partnership with Cape Cod Commission in the summer of 23 to start looking at standard water quality parameters on ponds all across the Cape, and that will add greatly to our knowledge of what's happening and inform our decision-making process on how to mitigate the areas that are showing signs of contamination or degraded water quality and protect those that are not yet experiencing them.
It's so interesting mentioning the satellites. I wonder how the technology works there. Either visually, is it that the ponds change color, or is it like a
Yeah,
heat map? Or
yeah. So they monitor color from space, and so what we've done is have their measurements on what those changes in coloration mean. We have synced up our sampling of a handful of ponds in Brewster and Falmouth in summer of 23, so that on the days when they're flying over and taking imagery of those ponds, we're out taking samples so that we get real-time information about what the cyano profile looks like. And then we're trying to develop sort of algorithms that draw relationships between what the cyano is in the pond and what the coloration view is from the satellites, so that we can use it as a predictive tool.
that's awesome.
It's really cool stuff. And it's the future of a lot of this work, because it's expensive and resource intensive and labor intensive to get out to the ponds that we're looking at. And because we're limited, we're not able to know where the blooms are going to be in ponds we're not monitoring. And so this way, if we can do 150 samples over the course of the week, I'd rather be able to send those 150 sample from ponds that are showing remotely indications of cyano bloom than going to ponds that we've scheduled that may or may not necessarily be indicating concern.
When it comes to swimming as well, and cyanobacteria really impacts pets and younger children. It's very dangerous for them. But does that mean that eventually you could foresee like an app or something where you could just be live checking the quality of a pond?
Right now, on our apcc.org website, we run a real-time map that, through very simple coloration, will show somebody the status of the particular pond from the last time it was sampled. So, when we are doing our routine sampling, it's every 2 weeks. When we get to a level of concern, we increase our frequency to weekly. Our map updates on a daily basis at 7 o'clock every night. So people can look at those from their phone. In the future world where we're doing more remote sensing, we'd be able to link the map coloration to the most recent sensing, and it would become even more frequent. We're not there yet.
That's awesome, though. As technology marches on, it's good to know that's going to hopefully boost your guys' mission and make it provide more hands, essentially.
Yeah, and we really encourage people to use the site to help guide their decision making. If you happen to live on a pond, it's your favorite pond. If we monitor it, great. If we don't, obviously that's not so good for you. But we do have a lot of information on our website on what people should be looking for visually to determine, at least get an indication on their own, whether there's an issue or not an issue there. And the general guidance that the EPA and the State Department of Public Health give, that we echo, is, when in doubt, stay out. So, even if we're not monitoring, our site does provide a fairly rich amount of information that somebody can use to inform themselves on what to look for, and then, use a precautionary principle to the limits of their own personal tolerance to make decisions about what they ought to do.
Do you foresee some like a county sponsored kind of a event essentially where you can have people show up and be like, here's what cyanobacteria looks like, have in a bucket or pictures or some kind of
Oh
workshop
yeah,
like
I mean, right now we do have that information on the website, so people can avail themselves of it. We do just some, events where we do provide guidance and training to people on what to look out for.
And just as moving topics a little bit, you guys are involved in a lot of other efforts to help protect water quality on Cape Cod. I know that you mentioned the heavy rainstorms and runoff, and that leads me to the effort with the boat ramps. You guys have been trying to help redesign, try to help prevent more of this runoff. Do you mind highlighting that for us and talking a little
Sure.
bit about how far that is?
Sure. So we were fortunate enough to apply for and obtain both a federal and state grant that has enabled us to look at about 20 or so publicly owned boat ramps um, throughout the Cape that contribute stormwater runoff to the receiving water. A lot of them are, focuses on freshwater, some saltwater sites as well. So, if you think about it, if you're launching a boat, the boat ramp is pitched towards the water. And typically the parking lot above or adjacent to that boat ramp drains down to the ramp area, and all that stormwater goes into the pond. And stormwater is a primary source of sediment, bacteria, and other constituents of whatever falls in the parking lot, leaky oil pan, gas drips, all that kind of stuff, that accumulates on hard surfaces and finds its way into the water. So we're in the process now of going through a prioritization process and have identified 20 or so boat ramps where we have preliminary designs of stormwater infrastructure, green infrastructure that diverts the water from the hard surfaces and allows it to receive treatment on site to take out the sediments, take out the nutrients, take out the bacteria, and prevent all that water from rushing down into the receiving water. So it's a way to minimize the impact of public boat launches on water bodies. Our goal is to do more detailed designs for these priority projects, and then we'll be working with the host communities and the state Department of Fisheries and Game that owns a number of these facilities to identify construction funds so that in 23 and 24 and 25 we'll be able to begin building these stormwater controls and improving water quality in these ponds.
All right, awesome. I also while you're here, I wanted to talk a little bit of politics. But before we move to that, is there any other initiatives or plans in the works from the association?
Well, we're very excited that sometime, we're taping this at 5 o'clock hour on Thursday, November 10th, sometime between 5 and 6 o'clock this evening. We have word that the governor is going to be signing large economic development budget package. Included in that package is $15 million that we worked hard with our legislative delegation and the governor's office to get money to provide additional support to towns who are building wastewater infrastructure, and to provide direct loan assistance to homeowners who are incurring the costs associated with septic upgrade and connection to these much needed municipal wastewater treatment sewer programs. So it's another significant infusion of money that's directed at the year-round population who are struggling to deal with the high cost of living on Cape Cod, and it's a direct way to provide assistance to homeowners through subsidizing loans through the Barnstable County Community Septic Program loan program to minimize the impact of getting cleaner water on Cape Cod. So that has been creating the financing necessary to make this affordable for first communities and now the homeowners who are connecting to the systems has been APCC's top priority over the year. And we're really excited about this additional successful step that we've been able take working with the legislature and the governor.
Right, awesome. And that is a segue as well into the politics conversation. We have just wrapped up the election season. Do you mind just talking a little bit more about how you feel the direction is we're going in terms of a delegation that is climate active, I suppose is the best way to put it. You've already mentioned some money our way, but are there other initiatives or delegates that you want to highlight, or any efforts at the state level that have been helping getting the funds that you guys need?
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate on Cape Cod to have a very progressive, thoughtful, and helpful legislative delegation. Obviously, there'll be one new member in that delegation this year or upcoming year. We look forward to working with Chris Flanagan. We've had over a decade of significant legislative achievement that has managed and mitigated the cost of water quality compliance for Cape towns and Cape homeowners, working with our delegation and two governors, Patrick and Baker, and we're looking forward, obviously, to working with incoming Governor Healy to continue that progress. So great track record of important, groundbreaking legislation on the wastewater finance side. And obviously we're in the cycle now of every 2 years, year and a half, legislature's been taking up major climate related legislation. I would say that, a lot happened last, a little less than a year ago with the climate bill that passed. We're still working on implementing that. I would say one of the major areas where we'd be looking for progress in the upcoming year is legislation that will enable the Cape Light Compact to do even more on conservation and alternative energy projects, to go well above the minimums that we see in the Mass Save program. Cape Light Compact has an aggressive set of really creative and thoughtful additional offerings that would help people on Cape Cod, develop an option, opt into alternative energy and battery storage, and they're blocked by adverse decisions from the Department of Public Utilities. So we're looking, I think, for changes to DPU and also hopefully legislation that clarifies and makes clear the unique needs of Cape Cod and the unique ability of the Cape Light Compact to meet the needs of our local customers, given our vulnerability to climate change. The other place we might be looking for some action is, we've had a great difficulty with the historic district commissions and the Route 6 corridor, the Old Kings Highway corridor, impeding the uptake of solar on rooftops in historic districts. And while we all understand and appreciate the historic nature, especially the Route 6 corridor, adopting and encouraging solar uptake on residential structures in the historic district is an important part of preserving those historic districts, because historic districts underwater aren't very useful, and districts have not been particularly thoughtful or progressive in their regulation of solar, have been overly restrictive in it, and despite some window dressing efforts recently on their part to provide exemptions for certain solar projects in historic districts, their administrative actions have fallen well short. And we think it's time that solar installations on rooftops become exempt from historic commission review, because we need people to adopt and be able to, and those who want to be able to solarize their homes and their buildings for a whole variety of reasons.
Do you think that this is specific to solar, but do you think there needs to be more mingling of energy sources and residential districts in general? I know that we just had a few wind turbines that were demolished just a short while ago because there was some contention with the local community nearby. Do you think there needs to be some kind of push on that front or some other changes?
Well, I think, the land-based wind is a difficult issue. And I think the future of wind is really in the deep water offshore wind investments that are being made, and that, land-based wind is going to be a marginal contributor to the alternative energy sector. Solarizing existing disturbed areas, rooftops, parking lot canopies, large scale commercial flat roofs, and already disturbed land areas like gravel pits and the like is the way we ought to be going. We ought to be actively discouraging and prohibiting, frankly, the destruction of green spaces for the purposes of installation of solar, until and unless we've exhausted all our capacity in the already disturbed areas and rooftops. And we're actually going in the opposite direction. Cutting down trees that provide a variety of carbon sequestration services and cooling in the name of alternative energy and carbon control is kind of insane. And so, where the landscape is under enormous pressure because it's cheaper and more attractive for large scale solar developers to go in, buy large tracts of land and cut down all the trees than it is for them to assemble already disturbed spaces. But the reality is that's a far better climate outcome than what we've been seeing in a number of places, and it puts enormous pressure on conservation areas and open spaces, which makes no sense.
In downtown Hyannis, we're seeing Barnstable start to reconsider some bylaw amendments. Is that the way that you can see a lot of the communities of the Cape going? Is that something that you guys encourage, the building up and being more centrally located, walkable areas, I suppose?
You mean in terms of solar development or in housing?
Well, in housing, but if incorporating solar as well, so if we can, I suppose, do you encourage getting all these things in the same location? Just
Yeah, I mean,
doubling.
certainly every rooftop that has sun exposure, should have and be encouraged to and facilitated to have solar. The utility companies don't really want that very much. There are a lot of disincentives built into the system that still make that hard. Certainly from a perspective of housing, we've done a project with the Housing Assistance Corporation, the Grow Smart Cape Cod project, where we are encouraging housing of sufficient density to provide affordability to be in already disturbed areas and downtown areas, and to be redeveloped, existing perhaps underutilized commercial spaces being the place where you ought to be redeveloping the housing, and to be taking pressure off green spaces in order to prevent degradation of habitat, fracturing of habitat, more water quality problems. And so, yes, we would like to see whatever housing development happens on Cape Cod, especially that which is necessary to address the affordability problems, to be concentrated in downtown areas, in already disturbed areas, and already developed commercial areas, and be supported by the extension of municipal wastewater infrastructure so that we're not trading off water quality for housing.
All right, Andrew, that's about all the time that we have. Thank you so much for answering all these questions. Really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you want to highlight for us, either ongoing things for the association or the targets that you're hoping that we can meet in the upcoming year when it comes to environmental issues?
Well, I think that, as I said, we're launching this freshwater initiative. I think there's an enormous amount of public interest in maintaining and preserving and restoring fresh waters. I would encourage people to get involved. There'll be opportunities people to engage and get involved as volunteers. And so I would say be looking out for that. And, on a regular basis, we put out a weekly newsletter. It's a great source of information, requires not much of you other than to sign up. And all that news gets put into your inbox on a weekly basis, middle of the week. So I would encourage people to go to our website, apcc.org, sign up for our website newsletter, sign up to be members, and we'll keep you informed of what you need to know.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. We really appreciate it.
Grady, always good to talk to you.